It says we're live, everyone. Good
Hello.
afternoon. I guess we're live. Here we are. Oh, how
Hello.
wonderful. I
Hi.
think I'm going to, hello, hello,
Uh,
hello. I'm going to take off my glasses for a minute. Well, welcome to See Black Women. It's good to see you all on the screen. It's good to see our friends and our family who are watching as well. And I guess I want to talk really briefly. I'll do the housekeeping and I'll do the welcome, but I just want to say how wonderful it is to be in community at the circle with you all this afternoon. My name is Ashara Ekundayo. I'm an independent curator and cultural strategist. I live in Oakland, California, and I have the gift of being able to work with many beautiful makers and creators around the world. Today, we are hosting the first of two conversations, two forums called Black Women, which are part of the Artists as First Responder platform in collaboration with Art+Action and the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, including our partners, the Museum of the African Diaspora. And at the end of the conversation, I will list all of the beautiful partners who are helping to support this conversation today. But I would be remiss if I didn't do a land acknowledgement. Those of us who are on this call today are sitting somewhere in the Bay Area, whether that be San Francisco or Oakland or Richmond or Berkeley. And I want to acknowledge that this conversation is happening on the unceded land of the Muwek Ohlone and the Ransom Ohlone people and their nation. Unceded, for those of you who don't know, means that the First Nation people did not and have not ever relinquished the land to the government by treaty or any other way. And so we're sitting on this land, and that the First Nations language spoken here is called Chuchengo. And the land that I live on here, Oakland, has a historical name called Wuchuan. And so we respect the land, we respect the people and the culture and the indigenous people of this land, and we honor those who came before us, those who are here, those who are coming, those who have stewarded this land and continue to do so. They are still here. Their language is still here, and this land is loved. So, with that, welcome. Welcome to See Black Women. And I want to do a little bit of housekeeping so that we can all, figure out our tech pieces. So, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can like and comment along the way. Feel free to ask us questions. We'll try to answer them at the end. We're going to talk for maybe 50 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. And if you want to watch the conversation without the comments, you can actually go to ybca.org and hit events, and it'll be live streaming there as well. Okay. You all good? You're still good? We're still in. So again, See Black Women is a two-part live forum featuring the Bay Area's, well, some of the Bay Area's most poignant Black women artists and curators. It's co-presented by Art+Action, the Museum of the African Diaspora, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and it is part of the Art+Action and YBCA's Come to Your Senses, Who Counts in America, an art and civic experience. Yes, we're here.
Yeah, we're here.
So, okay. I know that was a lot. That was a lot. Um, in the possibilities for us being able to like acknowledge and see each other and celebrate each other, I want to invite each of you all to introduce each other, and then we'll move into the conversation. We have four big buckets that we'll try to get to in the next hour. Okay, so we'll start with my beloved Angela Hennessy.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I am introducing Sydney Kane. Sydney's pronouns are she and they. Sydney is a descendant of the Kane family, Ruffin family, Starkey and Severnborn, born in San Francisco by way of New Orleans and Michigan. Sydney recently completed her undergraduate degree and has already had exhibitions at the African American Art and Culture Complex, at Raina Branston Gallery, at Ashara Ekundayo Gallery, but is in some ways at the beginning of her career. But my sense is that Sydney has been on this path for a really, really, really long time already. Like geological time, like cosmological time. Sydney is one of those people who is an artist to the bone. Like every cell in her body is about making, breathing, channeling her work. And my sense is when I don't know Sydney well, we've just been getting to know each other, but I've been seeing her around at all the exhibitions. And my sense is when I see Sydney is that she is a person who carries her people with her. Her work with ancestors and spirits and energy. You know, it's like that sort of presence where you feel your people right there alongside. So that's the feeling that I get. And the first time that I saw Sydney's work was like, it was so familiar in that way of family, like when you see yourself in work, and that kind of recognition that, you know, that is such a gift. It's really a gift for us. So thank you for being who you are. And, you know, look at where you are right now with all of us.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to introduce the lovely Erica Demon. Their pronouns is she, her, and they were born in Nottingham, UK, and it's the grandchild of Lalita Adasa Poison. We also hold ancestors in the islands of Jamaica. Did I get that right? Yes. And then, you know, when I think about Erica Demon and my introduction to you as an artist, it was through teaching when you taught at Ashara Gallery.
I think we have a pause.
Your pause, Sydney. Is she paused for you all?
Yeah, she's paused. But coming back, I hope.
Okay. It looks like the internet is going out. These are part of the fun things that we have to do. Sydney, are you back? We can see you.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Takes a minute.
No, we can hear you now. Sydney, we can hear you. Well, you know what? Let's keep moving on, and then she'll hear that we can hear her in a minute. You know, so we'll move on from.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. You were talking about Erica being born somewhere in the UK.
That was the last thing you guys saw her?
That's the last thing I heard.
Oh my God. I said so much. Oh, technology. Oh my God.
Sorry.
You didn't hear nothing about you're a grandchild of Lalita Adasa Poiser?
I think we heard that.
Okay. At least that.
Okay. Erica?
Well, I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing Lava Thomas. Gender pronouns are she, her. Lava was born in Los Angeles and raised by the Southern women of her family. And she is the grandchild of Stella Evelyn Williams. You know, when I think about you, Lava, I feel how you extend yourself with love and care. And I see you as so many things, but I see you as a mentor, as a friend, as a mother. you know, your words and your presence center and ground me. And I think they ground so many people that know you. It's interesting that I can feel your life force in a room before I see you. I know that you are there, and to me that is true power. And I am very thankful to have you in my life and to call you a friend. I think your art is transcendent. It covers so many important issues that we have to deal with as Black women. And I am so in awe of how you conduct your practice, how you communicate your intellect. And I think you are such a wondrous and just unbelievable person to have in this community.
I'm going to start crying now. Thank you.
We love you, Mother.
We do.
Oh, thank you. And I love all of you. You all. Thank you.
Love fest.
Well, I have the honor of introducing Angela Hennessy. Angela was born in Monterey, California. Her pronouns are she, her, they. She lives and works in Oakland, where she teaches at California College of the Arts. She is the granddaughter of Marilyn Martin Farrar, Jack Hennessy, and Vivian Johnson Blakely. Angela is an artist, a scholar, a professor, a seer, an organizer, a fierce warrior, a ritual creator, a holder of space, a sister, a ponderer, a conjurer, a mother, a keeper of secrets, deep secrets, a daughter, an advocate, a thinker, a writer, an educator, a truth teller, a maker, a mourner, a creator, a joy giver, a grief facilitator, a performer, and my dear friend. Thank you. Thank you, Angela.
I want to invite us to take a breath together. And just have this opportunity to slow down and sneak and just sink into the beauty of each other. And, you know, it doesn't really matter, you know, who's watching or who's listening right now, because I really just came to sit with you all today and gather at the water as women do, and sit in the circle as women do, and sit between my legs and let me plait your hair as women do. And, you know, this opportunity for us to just maybe pull the thread just a little bit on your core values and your art practice and your way of taking care of being women, women's ways. So for the next, let's say 50 or so minutes, we have four conversations that we'll try to navigate. The first being our Black women's legacy on being counted and being seen, on art making inside this worldwide cataclysmic paradigm shift. Yeah. On designing repositories for collective grief, and on the notion that Black women deserve to be happy. I know it might seem like an easy task to talk with four artists and to talk about art all of the time, but indeed our being on the planet, our giving to each other and to our families is art making. So with that, I'll say our overarching message and our invitation in this forum called See Black Women, which is a newly formed curatorial and artistic collective, is to not only see with your physical eyes, but we have a call to hear Black women, trust Black women, love Black women, protect Black women, and pay Black women. In our centering of our lives, ideas, and labors in a year where bodies are being counted through the census, can each of you share a personal story about Black bodies, Black people being in that number, as we say, as we know? Either a story from your family growing up or a story, more recent chosen family relationship. So in particular, I'm asking you in this call to action from our See Black Women manifesto, is there one particular phrase that resonates more with your identity and how you currently are living? See Black women, hear Black women, trust Black women, love Black women, protect Black women, and pay Black women. I want to start with you, Sydney Kane.
Well, seeing Black women is like, you can't help but go to the other ones to trust, to hear, to listen. Anything, if you don't move up the ladder or across the board or whatever, then it's usually an act of denial, I feel like. But in thinking about seeing Black women and the census and being counted, my introduction to that is actually searching for family members and listening to stories from my grandmother and my aunts and my great grandmother about their mothers, about, you know, my great grandmother, Grandma Sarah, her mother, Lula. I kind of like went on this kind of quest to search for family members and see how many folks I could find. Some of them that don't have names, some of them do have names. And one of the techniques, or one of the ways in which you do that outside of the oral tradition, is through looking through old public records, one of them being the census. And that brings up like a whole other
It sounds like, Sydney, your internet is choppy. It's going in and out. And so we're gonna circle back to you. I want to invite Lava to ring in on this question as well, knowing that part of your practice, Lava, is also connected to searching public records for your family. But is there one of the lines or one of the invitations inside of the See Black Women Manifesto that is resonating with you right now in your work?
A family story, and I'll be very short with this because it echoes exactly what Sydney said, looking through public records, the census being one of them, to trace my matrilineal line back to slavery, and looking at the 1900, 1910, 1920, and 1930 census when my family was based in Decatur and Vernon, Texas. I think about that powerful moment that See Black Women originated, this origin story for See Black Women, which was the panel at your gallery, Ashara Ekundayo Gallery in Oakland, that last artist talk, and the panel with Dr. King, Angela Hennessy, where we talked about the dismissal and disrespect of Black women's intellectual and creative labor by the San Francisco Arts Commission when the selection panelist choice wasn't honored. That was a powerful moment. So for me, the movement of See Black Women really speaks to our being acknowledged being recognized, and being valued. And I just have to express my gratitude for the support from everyone in that room that night. I mean, it was standing room only.
Mm-hmm.
And just the love, the respect out of that panel, the love for you, Ashara, for hosting. I'll never forget it. So See Black Women for me, it takes me to this quote by Angela Davis. When Black women win victories, it's a boost for every segment of society. So when we are seen, heard, paid, loved, protected, everybody wins.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Thank you. Angela Hennessy, do you have some thoughts around this as being one of the core founders around the See Black Women
Yeah, I
Collective?
do. I think, you know what, the manifesto, as we're calling it, the See, Hear, Trust, Love, Pay, Protect, there isn't like one single one that is standing out for me right now. It's like they're all really in my face all the time these days. And what they've kind of become like, sort of a prayer, a recitation, something that I'm like hearing, I'm talking to myself, I'm saying the words to myself. And they're really like holding up a mirror for me. And, I think when I spoke at the panel and those words, we've changed a few things, but when those words kind of came up, the way that they emerged was really about kind of a call to ask others to come and see us and hear us and on. And what I have been realizing more and more is that it's also, about how do we see each other? How do we hear each other, trust each other, pay, love, respect each other. And so that's what I'm zeroing in on right now is like, well, how do Black women, how do we even see ourselves, and how am I seeing myself in this moment? How am I seeing the Black women in my lives and in my life and all of you? So, because it's not a given. It's not a given that, even though we share, a lot in terms of identity or origin stories or, who we are in the world or how people see us, that it's not a given that we will, step up with these kind of, maybe their agreements or something or requests. It's not a given that we do that in our own lives. And so that's what I'm looking at right now is like, okay, well, if I'm asking other people to see me, like, how am I seeing all of you? How am I living up to that message? So, it's very much like a mirror being held up of just showing me in, all different kinds of relationships, whether they're interactions with people that I know and love or, people that I don't know at all. So that's what I'm looking at right now.
Thank you. Erica, what are your thoughts around this?
I mean, to kind of tap into what Angela was just saying, really kind of thinking about what I am doing, for our community, for Black women and how I can, use my voice and my platform to kind of forward our ability to be seen, to be heard, loved, protected. And one of the dedications that I've made in my own practice is to pay Black women and to use my platform and the money that I can earn and share that with the community. And that has kind of manifested itself through a dedication to using Black women as assistants for the paid work that I do. So whether it be, for magazine work, for newspaper work, kind of inviting my tribe in. And, if that means flying people in from other cities, flying people in and making sure that they get paid and that we are sharing skills. So that's really what I'm thinking about right now and kind of just like Angela was saying, you know, what am I actually doing as well? You know, how am I thinking about the work that I make? If my practice is mainly me and one other person, if I do need somebody else, who does that person look like? If I make work with Black people, then the other person in the room should be another Black person, and ideally this person is a Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, thinking about, you know, legacy, you know, I think about my immigrant story, you know, thinking about this multi-generational Black feminism that runs through my family. So thinking about the journey that my grandparents made from Jamaica to the UK, thinking about that, the sharing of love and the protection that they showed and gave me. And kind of also, you know, going back to that place as well, especially as I find myself as an immigrant in this country, really reflecting on that mirroring of experience.
Thank you. I'd like for us to have more conversations about what it means to be an immigrant, and you know, and to have one kind of identity, and then to live in the United States and then be kind of like considered Black, and all of the kind of complexities and multifacetedness of that identity, to go from being Jamaican to being British to being Black, a Black American, versus an Afropean, or you know, someone whose parents or whose family also lives on another continent and inside of another kind of economic system. I guess let's talk a little bit about, you know, pulling into the conversation of paying Black women in art making and your art practice, as we're looking at this we're looking at the paradigm and cultural shift that we're inside of. Black lesbian sci-fi author Octavia Butler. Yes, her words being propped up right now, her books being reread, her words being incanted heavily, you know, from Parable of the Sword to Parable of the Talents. Each of you are considered, you know, creatives and creators in this era. So I want to ask you about how you're visioning or witnessing a shift in your practice or your technique or your materials, as well as your hopes for the creative sector as we also kind of navigate these drastic policy measures and funding for arts, you know, and if you have thoughts on how creatives, how artists, musicians, movement makers, poets, how we're faring, how we're going to support paying ourselves and paying each other in this shift.
It's kind of amazing though, like how much money is popping up, you know,
Do you
like
want
all
to
of
start?
the grants and
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
all of the grants that are popping up and money that is suddenly available that seemingly wasn't there before, you know? So I've kind of been thinking about that as well. You know, shifts that I see, like I just finished the semester with my students at CCA, and, you know, it's now like have been hosting Zoom critique sessions, studio visits by Zoom. And, you know, but now of course there's studio visits with, you know, my students like in their bedrooms or at the kitchen table. And so, you know, one of the things of course that has been happening with the pandemic is this, you know, like, no, you know, we're not like hardly anyone's going anywhere, right? Students aren't going to school. They aren't going to the studios anymore. So there's like a restriction to, you know, access to materials and, you know, studio facilities and space and things like that. And so I think there's a way that, at least, you know, in conversations that I'm having, I'm noticing that, you know, my students are like kind of looking around their bedrooms, like, you know, what is here? What is at hand? Like, what is accessible? You know, with all of the restrictions, like, okay, well, what does that mean? What is left? What do I have access to? And I mean, in my work specifically, my work is pretty low tech, you know. I don't use a lot of machines or equipment. You know, I use a lot of hair in my work. It's very everyday. Like my materials are very everyday materials: hair, cloth, soap, So, and, you know, my techniques are, you know, like I'm braiding, I'm twisting, I'm doing all of these very foundational kind of everyday rituals and gestures. And so that hasn't changed for me. And I think maybe there's kind of, you know, if it's like an urgency, or I think in crisis, and certainly when death is in the air, you know, when death is present, there's a way that everything gets reprioritized, and it becomes clear pretty quick, like what is important, what you actually care about, right? And all this stuff that maybe you were spending a lot of time or energy on that was taking up a lot of energy, those things sort of fade away, right? It becomes really clear, you know, what you need to be attentive to. And so in that sense, you know, I think maybe there's you know, just a zeroing in, a real focus, you know, as we are in our homes and sheltering in place, you know, in this physical way, there's also a kind of, you know, coming back to a center, coming back to a place of home, and what like really matters. So, you know, that could yield some really beautiful things in the long run. You know, we'll see what the ripple effect is.
Has your practice, have you done something that is specific to or inspired by because of this COVID-19 pandemic?
I haven't yet. I mean, I work very slowly, so even though I feel a sense of urgency, I'm also, you know, I make a lot of work that nobody ever sees. So like things that I might be working on now that maybe would express a kind of urgent response to the pandemic, you know, that may be work that like I never show, right? But that's sort of the first iteration, which is, you know, based maybe more in my own, you know, kind of personal, you know, whatever my own issues are. So, but in terms of what I actually produce for a gallery or for a museum kind of space, there's a lot, you know, there's a lot of work and a lot of evolution that needs to happen before I get to that space. One thing I would say that I have been doing very specifically that I've kind of returned to is just a very like a very simple way of tracking things that are going on for me. And it's like my note cards and trying to just track my thoughts, right? So I don't know really what it's all going to look like yet, but you know, I'm literally just making notes to myself constantly. And they usually kind of end up as a clue of something that I might find later that is like, oh yeah, that thing I was thinking about at that time, you know? So right now I'm not focusing too much on what it all means. I'm just trying to capture these moments where, you know, like the kind of, I don't know, it feels like the veils are really thin, right? This moment where there's a lot of, you know, the energy, there's like a lot of big energy, I think, in the air right now. And thinking about what the pandemic means and some of these ideas about the, you know, the Arundhati Roy article that came out last month about the pandemic as a portal, right? So there's a lot of transformation that is happening right now, whether we are stepping into it and we're willing participants, or maybe we're resisting, or, you know, whatever the relationship is to that, you know, we each have to navigate. But right now I'm just trying to track things that I see happening and observing, you know, how things are presented in the news and in media. And, you know, what's it look like.
Yeah. But Lavin, how does this speak to you? Shifts witnessing in your practice or technique or materials, or what your hopes are for the art sector in terms of policy and pay?
In terms of my work, I have just started to make work about this moment of plague that we're in. Just started. Before, I was writing a lot and giving myself permission to play with materials, to do some things that were fun, that I hadn't, crafty sorts of things that I was doing before. I became a professional artist. So behind me,
Mm-hmm.
it's a study, the first study of, and I don't know, usually if I do a study, it leads to a larger body of work. But this study of eyes with negative space as a mask, and really thinking about how Black women are at the forefront, leading in terms of policy during this time of a pandemic, but also how Black women are risking their lives as essential workers. And in this era, the mask, whether one wears one or not, has become so politicized that I'm beginning to, for the first time, dive into that. So we'll see where that leads.
Mm-hmm.
But it has taken a while for me to get to the point where I'm actually creating work about the era that we're in now. In terms of how the pandemic is being experienced by artists and arts institutions, and my hopes, what I'm seeing makes me very sad. I know that I know personally that there are a lot of folks who are suffering financially, who are in the gig economy, especially folks who don't have teaching jobs to sustain them, and folks who are dependent upon the sales of their work to sustain them. The collectors are not collecting at the level that they had been. Although reading some articles in Artsy, for example, how some of the online fairs are doing, some galleries are still doing well, but I'm afraid that there will be galleries that close, that don't come back, that artists who were working and their sales were sustaining them will have to look for other work if that's even possible. I mean, we're in a time of unemployment that we haven't seen since the Great Depression. So
That's right.
while I hope that there is a rally and that financial institutions come back, I know just because of the financial and economic state of the rest of the country in particularly the economic state of people of color, that it's a bloodletting and it just hasn't stopped yet. So I hope and pray that that we come back, but I honestly don't know what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. You know, Erica, you and I have over the years spoken many times about how race and class and racism show up in kind of the larger art sector. We've had lots of conversations around how what we know inside of the philanthropic sector as well is that Black, Indigenous, women of color, artists of color are last to be funded, to be supported, first to be forgotten, as we are, as we know. I'm wondering, I know that you have a very clear focus around how you present the conversation and invite people to like observe and experience the silhouette. I'm wondering if there's something that has emerged, maybe pre-COVID pandemic or inside of it, that your work is inviting us to look differently, about how we view and how we take in the truth and the revelation that is is very much a white supremacist patriarchal framework in which many of us work in. Those of us who work inside the art sector and artists like yourself who are shown all over the world in museums and galleries.
Yeah, it's, I really have been taking some time to really digest and search through, my time in the US and the experiences that I've had. And, kind of prior to the shelter in place, this new path forward that we are currently walking on. They're really thinking about, you know, this return to self, and actually thinking about returning. So, you know, I've begun kind of turning my camera to kind of look at myself and to kind of think about this vision that I see belonging to me, and thinking about the changes that happened throughout time. We're thinking about what Angela was saying about this sense of mortality, and I've been really feeling that at this time, probably more than I've ever felt it before. And you know, as Black women, we always feel this sense of mortality because of all of the aggressions that we face in everyday life. And I've been thinking about not having to be out in the world and what that means to my body, to not be using these microaggressions, this anti-Black sentiment. What has it meant for me in my practice? And when I do turn the camera on myself, to see myself in this particular place at this time. So much of my work is based on visibility and scale. And you know, as a photographer, many people do put out photography books, and one of the reasons I haven't created a book as yet is because of the presence of my work and not wanting to kind of lose the impact. But you know, in this situation, there is no way to see other than on this screen through this camera that I used to cover up because I didn't trust who was looking at me. And yet now this camera is the only way that we see each other, which takes me down a whole rabbit hole of structure that are seen through the platforms that are created. The configuration of the camera that is looking at me is not configured to me, to my skin. Is the microphone configured to my voice? And to think about all of these systems of white supremacy and how they translate beautifully into online areas and into this arena, into the platforms that we use, that minorities use, and our data is mined from. I think about my work in terms of community and of collaboration, and how there is naturally a shift right now, because the thing that makes us strong, our community, is actually now a vulnerability, and that being together, we make ourselves vulnerable. And so I'm making work, which is not about this moment in time. It's about a time earlier, a time back at the headlands, in a different type of isolation. They're kind of expanding my practice, from photography to sculpture, and thinking about this transition, this technology, this journey. I have, for about 6 years, I've purchased a lot of African American photographs on eBay. A friend and I purchased them together. I became very obsessed with this lot, and I didn't have the money at the time. And Cheryl Ward is her name, Black woman Cheryl Ward. And she said to me, Erica, buy this lot of photographs. And so we purchased them. And we spent about 3 months going through all of these photographs, looking at people's lives. And we packed them away, and we probably didn't look at them for another 4 years. And when I was at the Headlands, at the residency there, I began looking at this work again, and it struck me that what I needed to do was to find a way to return these images to relatives, to find a way for the ancestors in the images to find a home. And so again, a classic portraiture body of work, but to me, it's incredibly important that I can find a way to find these images their home again, and that this is just not another moment of erasure. That, you know, reading your interview together with Lava, that, you know, Black families do have this resource. They do have images of themselves, not just the stories that we pass down, that there is some actual physical record.
That's right. That's right.
So
So, and yeah, the importance of finding whose stories they are, those spaces. This, it's almost like, you know, putting a name on a grave. I know we've had some conversations over the weeks, thinking about this conversation today around collective grief, but about ancestors. I'm wondering, Sydney, if you know want to offer something as well before we move into the next conversation, the next part of this conversation, about your work or any shift that you're seeing in this paradigm shift.
Hopefully I don't get cut off. If I do, just keep moving. But even with like the census, like the last question I was trying to get into was this idea of refusal, you know, from the Black feminist study that we had on Sunday. And I've been thinking about like not wanting to be seen and how it feels to exist in like the space where I'm not, where I'm just kind of like, I don't know if you ever go to the woods or to the ocean and like you just exist with yourself and the surroundings. Like I'm working on, I'm tapping into creating in that kind of space because I have the privilege of space and time to do so. So yeah, when you think about like refusal, even like ancestors who don't want to, or people, our stories that don't want to go back, that don't want to go into the past and just want to focus on the present or the future. And there's, you know, there's so many perspectives about about what that means. Because when we do go back and try to look and dig and put names on those graves, like it brings up a lot for some people. Yeah.
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 For
Refusal.
folks who aren't familiar with your work, I remember some years ago you had a solo show at my other gallery, and you had a statement where you said, I see portals. I see through the portals, and the ancestors come through those portals and present themselves to you. And then the opportunity for you to like put the graphite, you know, to the wall or to the floor, or to the canvas, or however you're using that, is that you pull those faces to us and invite us to like figure out if we know that being. That's what happens for me when I look at your work. Do I know that ancestor? Is that my grandmother? Is that my grandfather? You know, I'm thinking about, as Angela was speaking, this death is so near. We're more aware of it. Death is always near, you know, because of media, because of social media, we're being given numbers every day, statistics and data. And we're not being given the numbers of the people who survive. You know, we're not saying, oh, this is how many people who have passed through the veil into the realm of the ancestors, but this is how many people are recovering and regenerating and resetting in their body with this virus. And
Yes.
so I guess I want to talk about, you know, how do we design for collective grief, and, you know, what kind of strategies can Black women, can Black artists, Black Indigenous women, people of color artists, I want to be very specific, which strategies can we employ as we cultivate individual awareness and as we, you know, move forward in our relationship with grief? How do we develop a relationship with grief and a collective grief to use it for freedom work?
I mean, I think that's a really big question that a lot of people are asking right now, and certainly folks that I know in the death care movement, you know, we're thinking about all of those things. A universal practice, and it's, I don't think they're too, I don't know, it's hard to say universal and what that means and who's included in that, but a cross-cultural practice around grief and mourning and collective, like the sort of collective responsibility around that. It comes down to naming, and naming and counting are kind of adjacent to each other. They complement each other. Counting, of course, is an abstraction. When we count the dead, it's an abstraction of who has actually died, right? So the naming is a really important component of that, and is a fleshing out of the number, right? So when we speak someone's name, someone who has died, there's a way that we are breathing, we're giving life to them through our breath, literally holding their name on our tongue, right? So that is really significant to me. And, to be like completely honest, when I first was approached by Art+Action about participating in the census campaign and the billboard and all of that, one of my initial responses was like, well, I don't, like, is that a good thing for everyone to be counted? Like, what is that? Is this like coming down to taxation and representation? And is that safe? There are, I think, many reasons that being under the radar or being, off the grid. I mean, I don't know. I grew up with, at least part of my growing up years with a bunch of hippies off the grid in Northern California. And so this idea of actually stepping into the light or claiming space or claiming, census dollars and being counted, like I really, like that, I think about that really seriously. And I am, in some ways part of a marginalized population, but I'm also, like I have a bit of security right now. And so when I think about what that means to step forward for folks who, it may not be safe. It may not be safe to actually be counted. So when I think about that, and, I've been doing a lot more research, and I agreed to participate in the billboard campaign because I do ultimately think that the counting is the beginning. That's the first step, is that, we count folks, we count them when they're born, we count people when they die. And so the census, I'm thinking of it now, is like, okay, we're counting people as they are alive, living and breathing. And, the numbers and the idea of what that means, like the resources that are generated through the census, I'm holding to that, that all better be, effing true, right?
Right.
So, right now I'm thinking like, yes, it's a good thing. And I want to promote the census. And, I want to know though, that we are going to create the communities that are going to hold these people, upright. Like if folks come forward to be counted and it becomes dangerous and unsafe and harmful, like, like that's not, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. So I think the counting is that's the first part. And, I'm really looking forward to seeing like, okay, what happens after that? When we do get these numbers, like then what? Then what are we going to do?
Because there is a history to what has happened to African people, to Black bodies being counted in the United States. There are reasons that people have historically said, I don't want to be counted. I grew up in a household where it was a big deal, that my mother was very much around, we're going to be counted, we're going to do the census. And that was before it was online. I mean, there was someone who was coming to the door. They send you a letter, we're coming to the door, they sit there with you, they look around, they write your name, I want to be in that number. Said something that is also important, and that is the being able to call the name, our creating of archive. And I would be remiss if I did not, call the name of Yuri Kutuyama. Today would have been her 99th birthday. We call that beautiful soul and shared a birthday with our brother Malcolm X and his work El Haj Malik El Shabazz, to call his name into the space today. And where would we be without their voices and their caretaking and loving of their freedom work for us? I just want to make sure that we also are remembering the power of being counted and what that means as we talk about visibility, invisibility, and the unspoken, unseen, and not thanked labor of Black people, and specifically of Black women, of Black mothers, and of artists as well. Where would we be right now without these artists? But designing repositories for collective grief. Lava, can you add something to this part of the conversation? I know we're going to start to move into the Q&A soon, but I want to get something from each of you on this.
I'll be brief because I've created memorials in the past, and this time that we're in now, it's going to take a minute for me to really think about what a repository of grief for this time will look like. I just know that for me personally, this is the second time in my life that I have felt, essentially, it felt like death has tapped me on the shoulder. Last year, almost exactly a year ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was really like a wake-up call for me to experience my mortality for the first time. And here we are a year later, and the specter of death is everywhere, and I'm not experiencing this alone. Everyone, well, I can't say that everyone is experiencing it, but it is it's a shared experience among a lot of people now. And also the realization that Black and brown folks are the ones who are dying disproportionately is a heavy burden. But and then you have that against the murders that we're seeing with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and this has continued not just throughout history, but in recent history. So Black folks, there's a quote by Claudia Rankine that I can't remember verbatim, but we've always been in a state of mourning. Death has always been very close to us. So I don't know what that will look like for us in this pandemic era, but it's something that I've been thinking about.
Sydney, do you have some stories, some invitation for us to tend to our dead, to be with our dead?
It's practice. I think that in some ways we all do tend to things that have passed. I think it's a little bit more about recognizing it, like in your everyday life, because it's closer to us right now. There's a whole business in removing death from the inner city spaces, but inner city. But I would say tapping into like, what ways do we honor people who are no longer here in the physical realm? Even if it's just like reading a book and looking at the citations and saying people's names.
There's something, thank you. There's something to that. And also something that you just said, Lava, as well, around being alone and having an experience alone. And one of the things that's been so deeply heartbreaking for me is this idea of people dying alone. And so much of the story around, folks being, really grappling and struggling to breathe and to be in a room in a hospital by themselves and to pass through, by themselves. And just culturally speaking, that's not our way. That's not how Black folks are, that, you gather around your family, the person who is leaving their body. So yeah, to have these repositories while we're also seeing these mass graves being dug, bodies being placed in them, with some level of, I think, carefulness and consideration. Erica, do you have more to offer to this part of the circle? Is there a story that resonates with you in terms of design and technologies for freedom work?
I mean, maybe not the story, but just thinking really about grief in kind of multiple ways, as well as death, but thinking about grief and mourning other losses that we have in our lives right now. Whether it be the loss of community, the loss of touch, kind of really thinking about that and about how we move forward from this and what that is going to look like. Yeah, I mean, just really feeling the weight of this moment through my body, through our bodies, thinking about the throat and the lungs and the heart being this center right now and this point of attack with this plague,
Yeah.
and kind of how it pertains to my own body. I think this time has been a time when I've looked through my life and realized that there's moments in time that I've not grieved myself fully because I haven't given myself the time to fully consider and sit with certain moments in my life. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, time to grieve myself and my thoughts, my family, my kin. That's important. I know, we have a lot of people watching online, and I don't have any questions that have been dropped in. I want to invite people to write questions, to like, to comment, across the platforms, and you can ask questions to Sydney, to Angela, to Lava, to Erica. You don't need to ask questions to me. I'm here to facilitate a conversation today, but you can ask questions to me if you like. I want to, wrap up our conversation with this notion that Black women deserve to be happy, and that's a wide kind of definition, happiness and joy, but there has to be a conversation that also includes our centering ourselves, our putting ourselves first, our taking care of ourselves and being in love, protecting ourselves, loving and trusting ourselves as well. There's a quote, I'm going to read this quote by Octavia Butler. Beware, at war or at peace, more people die of unenlightened self-interest than of any other disease. And, when I read that at first, it was like, oh, she's talking about, people dying of their own kind of like their ignorance, or them being kind of like stricken with, the danger of unenlightenment, and then them moving forward in community. But I wanted to turn the conversation a little bit more towards what it means to be enlightened around my own self-interest, and to actually center Black women in my happiness, our collective happiness, because often we're framed as angry Black women, but we're also full of joy and buoyance and effervescent as well. And so what might it be? I want to know what your requirements are for being able to show up for your work and your practice and community, with your self-interest being first, and do and how do joy and pleasure play a role in that, in your happiness. And, hopefully people will have some questions around that too. But Angela, you start.
Yeah.
What are your requirements? Requirements to be able to show up.
Yeah, my requirements really have to do with being able to hear myself think. So, sometimes that might be like actual silence, like, noise out on the street that, is sort of interrupts my thought process or something I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I've been thinking about how like scientists right now and seismologists are talking about how because there's so much less activity right now on the whole planet that they are able to detect and hear sounds from within the earth. Like they're able to detect mini earthquakes or whatever's happening underground, right? And it's literally because there's so much less movement and less energy and noise being created. So I've been thinking about that a bit and really feeling like kind of coming back to this place of like, oh, like ideas and images and words are coming back into my mind, and like I'm hearing things that are like things I've thought before, but now I'm in this place where a lot of the background noise has the volume has gone down, so now I'm able to hear these other ideas and things come forward. But one thing I was thinking of when I first read your question about self-interest, that self-interest slides for me really fast into selfishness. And as an artist, I have been accused of being selfish, in so many relationships and so many aspects of my life. And it's really like it gave me a new way of thinking of it, of like, well, it's actually self-interest. It's like, I'm looking at, my books, my materials, the color palette, the gestures, the things that I'm doing. And like, I'm engaged in those things. And I think often, like I need a lot of time to just sort of, maybe it looks like I'm spacing out, but actually like I'm really deep in thought and I'm going in because I'm interested in these things, right, that I have gathered around me. But it slides into selfishness, or at least, sometimes that is what has been projected back to me. So I love this idea of, well, it's actually self-interest and being able to claim that of like, this is actually what I need as an artist. This is a requirement for me as an artist. And so thank you for that, because I didn't know that quote. I hadn't heard that quote before. And wow, it's like, it feels like a really, really incredible gift. And part of that, of course, is then related to joy and pleasure. And, how for me, as someone who does a lot of work kind of navigating these spaces between the living and the dead, and, I've spent like so much time in the grief realm. And I move in and out of that space, and I have a lot of practices and things that I do to tend to that. And so it's really just been maybe in the last, I would say, year that I have been thinking more about joy and really looking at how joy and grief can live in the same house, and sometimes at the same time. And like I think maybe it's like also partly growing older. It's partly because I have done a lot of grief work that now there's more space for joy. So joy is moving back in like a really big way, and I'm super excited about that.
I want to stop you there. I want to stop you right there. I love that. Joy is moving back in because you made some space for it. Lava, what are your thoughts?
I've always needed a lot of downtime. And I'm unapologetic about it. I've always needed it. So in order for me to show up for my work, it's interesting because I think of the actual making part of my work as a kind of downtime because it's very meditative. And it's something that gives me an incredible amount of joy. There are other aspects around what we do, being in this field, the art field. It's very social, that we are not engaging in, or if we are engaging in it, it is strictly through a virtual screen. But going to exhibitions and physically being at panels and that kind of thing, I get, as much as I enjoy that aspect of my work, I'm finding that being home and pulling in and having the time to actually garden for the
Yes.
first time in a very long time, to enjoy my home and my family. A lot of that now looks like just so much busy work, and it was, some of that was exhausting. So being able to take care of my body, my health, dancing gives me an incredible amount of joy.
Yes. Yes.
And to be able to dance at any moment that I feel like it, you know, turn on some music. I'm at home, dance with my son. I'm
We're having a dance
grateful.
party.
Yeah, I'm incredibly
We're doing
grateful for that. So, in order for me to be generous and to give, I have always had to take care of me first. And I've known that about myself for a long time, being the only girl and the oldest. I've always had to, you know, take that time for me. So, and I've been called selfish many times, but you know, I own it.
Okay.
Love it.
Sydney, you bet. Sydney?
Man, I was thinking a lot about what you said, Angela. I have a friend who said that, you know, it's not really maybe a better term than selfish is like self-fulfillment. It's a little nuanced. And when you think about like our mothers or our parents, our grandmothers, ancestors who were not allowed to do some of the things that we do right now, I feel like I'm just a continuum of some of their desires and things that they've already did, but, you know, just, you know, a little bit more on the low and whatnot. So, and yeah, I mean, being doing art it's a refusal and self-fulfillment for myself right now. And that brings me joy.
Thank you.
For a piece of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Erica, you want to close us out? What's your requirements for joy and pleasure?
You know, I feel the joy of the wind on my face, a warm breeze, just having that flow through my body, you know, listening to the universe and what she has to tell me. And she has plenty of things to tell me, and maybe I wasn't always listening. And you know, how much I hear right now. You know, kind of returning to my body, you know, using exercise as a way to de-stress is something that I have found solace in. You know, really just self-care. But I think it really is the universe that kind of motivates me and brings me back to making the work that I've been making. It's been because of the time that we have right now, I've grown to accept the days where I don't want to make something, and to feel that that is okay, that my role as an artist is not purely to make art every day, that I can feel and breathe and be something other than that label for that particular day, but then to just listen to my intuition and to know when is the right time to make something, or to look at a photograph, to revisit some work. That acceptance has brought me so much joy, and just released any of the pressures that we feel that we have right now to produce. And you should feel that we can be outside of this capitalist system of producing art at this moment in time. And that has brought me a lot of joy. Also, collaborations, Erica Badu and Jill Scott. I mean, watching
that was everything.
People come
that was
together.
all things.
Joy. I didn't have the next quote to end on, and it's a short quote, but he said, "One day, may we all meet together in the light of understanding.
Indeed. What a wonderful way to end our conversation today. Thank you. Thank you for your time, your practice, your vulnerability. I know this was it was a challenge for some of us. So as I'm going to invite you all to, I don't know, we can stay here for another few minutes, but I want to thank the team that is supporting See Black Women, supporting this experiment, and allowing myself as a curator a lot of creative license around it. So the Curatorial Coalition for Art+Action, which includes myself, Amy Kish, Brittany Thicken, Sarah Cathers, Martin Strickland, Candace Huey. Thank you. Thank you for that, this buoyant, kind of like spaciousness to explore. Of course, the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts and their amazing creative and marketing and tech team, including the ones running the event. Shout out to Corey, who's also supporting online with us today. The Museum of the African Diaspora, our beloved dear friends there. So happy for them to be able to like have such a successful artsy auction a couple of weeks ago. Just like big up, collect Black art, select Black art, buy Black art, pay Black women. But we have to keep our Black museum institutions afloat and thriving. So big ups to MoAD. The Artist as First Responder platform, I have a couple of special thanks as well. Of course, the See Black Women Collective, the Oakland Human Services Department, and the Recast Grant, the African American Art and Cultural Center in San Francisco's historic Fillmore neighborhood, and the Girls and Women of Color Collective, which holds our project as their own. And lastly, I want to remind you all to take the census. I've taken the census. We took it in my house. I want to remind you all to take the census. It's important. It's important this year. It's important to be counted. It's important to have your name written down so that your ancestors can find it. It's important that your grandchildren be able to call your name. So you just go to my2020census.gov. It takes 9 minutes, I promise you. And I guess I want to invite folks to join us next week. On Tuesday, May 26th, we'll be hosting another See Black Women conversation. It'll be 4:00 Pacific time, and I'll be sitting in circle with Lukesa Branfem Verissimo, Tahira Rashid, Asia Abdrahman, and Sam Vernon. And there'll be different questions, but it will still be the circle and the women coming to the water. So thank you all today for your time, and thank you all for seeing each other, for seeing me, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Hey, thank you.
Love you.
Thank you.